Please welcome our next speaker, Derek Krebs, a senior consultant. Today, he will be presenting his session, Management Reporter, Advanced Reports, Balance Sheet, Cash Flow, and Others. Please stick around after Derek's session for a live Q&A.
All right, welcome everybody. This is Derek Krebs and welcome to Dynamics Con. And today's session, I'll be acquainting with Management Reporter. This topic is actually called Advanced Reports. We're going to be focusing on balance sheet reports, secondly, cash flow, and several other cool reports. And I'm just going to do a couple minutes in PowerPoint to introduce some of the topics and agenda for today. But the bulk of the session, we'll be looking at some product capabilities and along with some tips and tricks. And I encourage you to take advantage of the chat window. And especially toward the end of the session, I'll be sticking around live to answer some questions you have afterwards. So do please submit questions along the way if you have any. I would like to also have you jot down my email. So in case there's any questions I'm not able to address in this session, I'll be sure to follow up there through my email, derek.krebs@msxgroup.com. Let me introduce myself further. Derek Krebs, I like to say I'm a consultant. I've been doing this for the last 23 some odd years, 100% devoted to financial reporting and budgeting products. And of those 23 years, I worked 12 years at Microsoft, along with all of our team members at MSX Group. We started way back when at FRX Software, and we worked internally at Microsoft for about 12 of those years, and the last 11 years as the MSX Group. So I want to share some of my many of years of experience with this Management Reporter product. So welcome one and all. And let's look briefly at today's learning objectives and agenda. And some of the key concepts we'll be looking at are, again, those balance sheet reports. I'll show you a few different flavors of those that are common that I see out in the real world. Followed by, many people are manually doing their statement of cash flow reports. So we'll look at some ways to automate that. And then also we'll be looking at advanced calculations that come into play, especially in our balance sheet and cash flow reports. And along the way, there might be a mixed bag of beginning and advanced users. So I'll be sure to share some tips and tricks along the way for maybe different user levels we might have joining today's phone call. So again, welcome one and all, and thanks again, Dynamics Con. As we start the first major topic of today on balance sheets, here are a few little bullet points to earmark. One would be, in every report, I encourage to add some check rows to make sure data integrity, we ran and wrote our reports correctly. That also involves easy capability to look at missing and duplicate accounts within the product. There's a term, what's called dimension value sets. That's a way to easily centrally name some grouped items, like here's these accounts of accounts receivable, or here's my cost of goods sold accounts. That way, if you ever change your mind or account groupings within those dimension value sets, you just change it in one spot to flow through the rest of your reports. Within balance sheets, there's also a rounding adjustment feature that could be multi-faceted, their advantage. I'll also talk about multi-currency along the way for wherever that might apply to those people attending in today's session. And along with the last bullet point, we're going to be looking at a few different column variations. A few little examples to that would be a rolling 12-month, either just the fiscal months of this year, or let's say always seeing 12 months across multiple years. Second column example might be if I wanted to show my companies side by side, just to name a few. And then when I get to the cash flow, I'll come back to this slide or reference some key concepts there. So without further ado, let me jump right into the application, Management Reporter. And what we're currently first looking at is my output of a report, and we call that our viewer. It actually comes in two different flavors of this viewer. We're currently looking at the web viewer, where I can easily deploy it without having any installation at all, no install required. However, a couple prerequisites to see any financial report that you send to your management and team members. One would be they have to be a user-defined in Management Reporter. And secondly, any user you send this financial report data to They have to be on your network because all this report data is stored securely in some SQL databases behind the scenes on your servers. The current flavor of the viewer we're currently looking at is what I call the web viewer, any type of browser. Several are supported. And then secondly, I'm going to transition to what's called the client viewer, which I prefer the latter as a power user, where you have more administration and better graphics. And let's even look at this first balance sheet report that we're looking at, especially column related. This is what I call my rolling 12 months. I actually ran this balance sheet report for the month of May, and I'm only seeing those months of this current fiscal year. Well, this report's okay, I guess, but what's even better is I like to see always 12 month. So that's going to be one key concept that we're going to look to within the column design. Now, what I'm going to do is on my taskbar, I'm going to be going to the Report Designer application. Some of this might be very familiar with some of you, but there might be some new users that are not so acquainted with it. And really, I want to emphasize a couple of things. One would be the user-friendly nature of creating reports into our good old rows, columns, and trees. And I can mix and match all of those reports. And let me just show you briefly. Here's the yellow open folder icon in my toolbar. That's an easy way to see a nice electronic copy of all the reports in the system. Like we're looking at all the report definitions, or here's a tab for all my rows, columns, etc. And what's great about Manage Reporter is you can mix and match your different building blocks. I'm clicking on this row definition heading. I'm then going to scroll down, and I see all of these reports are sharing the same line set or row for my income statement. That way I just create my row once, and I could use it for 5, 10, 100 reports, that same row definition. Let me cancel this out. Now, behind the scenes, as occasion I might go back to our completed report, I'm going to show you what was involved to create this balance sheet report. And how about let me continue by looking at the first building block of 2 that is required for every single report. That being my column definition, and then secondly, my row definition required in every report. You just mix and match those, as I just commented. And the third building block we have is also the reporting tree, which the advantage and most common use of the reporting tree is to take a report, breaking it down by maybe companies that we have in our reporting tree and or departments or locations based on your general ledger structure. Now, in this particular report, I ran it for the base period of 5, which is May for our fiscal calendar company going from January to December. I'll return back to the designer, and then I'm going to use these icons. I'm looking at currently the report area. Here's where I define a given row for my report, or beneath it a given column, and I can mix and match. But let me try to paraphrase some of this. I'll assume most of you have some exposure to the Manage Reporter application. And then when I spoke of some rolling 12-month report, let me even now go to the report list, because I actually have a couple other reports I opened ahead of time to save in some time and speed. Now for this first balance sheet, what I call my months of just this fiscal year, let me emphasize again, whenever you run a report, you define whatever your base period is and base year. So in this field here, I'm going to emphasize maybe period 5 I'm running it for, or whatever year. And here's where I'll tease a little bit of the Microsoft demo data that is a little dated in this application, but I feel comfortable doing so since I worked at Microsoft for 12 plus years. Now, as I open up the column definition for this report, where I'm looking at just the months of this fiscal year, this is being one of the key fields I want to hone in on. I call this where we hard code in our months or periods, like period 1, period 2, period 3, etc. And I'm not going to go through all the different column types, but basically, this is what we call a financial dimension column, where I'm grabbing data from my general ledger. That could either be actual data or maybe different budgets, as I'll probably segue to some of those reports later, time permitting. And then the next 2 fields, respectively, are whatever year I'm grabbing data for and whatever period. Now, another tip for our financial reports is when I ran the report for period 5, I'm only seeing these 5 columns of data here, because we are using what is called a conditional print control. And that condition here at the very bottom is if my period, the letter P, if my period is less than or equal to my base report date of period 5 that I ran it for, I'm only showing those columns that I have closed, let's say, because maybe period 6, I have some reversing entries or began period 6, but I'm not yet done with it. So when I ran the report for period 5, only those 5 columns are showing. Well, that report's, again, okay, where if I ran it for period 1 or for period 2, I only see 2 columns or 2 months. That's where I feel, I feel a little shortchanged, especially me analyzing the data, or maybe management doing the same thing, trying to view the financial report data. So a favorable balance sheet report that I like doing is where I always show the 12 months, which I'm now going to cancel out of that column definition. I'm going to come here to my report list, and let's look at the second variety of our balance sheet where I'm always showing 12 months. And before I exit this column, that's where I hard-coded in the periods 1 through 12. But alternatively, this report where I'm always showing 12 months, here's an icon you're going to frequently use to generate the report, meaning grab the latest, greatest data that you've posted to from your general ledger database. But I'm going to click on this little shortcut to open up my last ran report. Instead of the web viewer, which I commented earlier, that is great for especially management, requires no installation if I had, let's say, 50 managers that see the financial report, but I actually prefer what we call the client viewer. Once again, here's the web viewer. You have some toolbar icons here at the bottom, but one advantage of the client viewer, of maybe many, is you have further administration to what we call the report library. I'll get into that thought in just a minute, but let me conclude looking at this column definition where I'm always showing 12 months. I so happen to be running it for December, but if I ran it for May, I'd see maybe the last 12 months prior to, let's say, the May report date. And then the big picture for this design or column format is where instead of me hard coding in the months like period 1, 2, 3, 4, I am using a more dynamic base concept. So here is I'm looking at 11 months ago, like base minus 11, 10 months ago, et cetera, et cetera. Since I'm always showing these months, I do not have that print control restriction that we saw in the other column, which once again was this field here, what we call a conditional column. We're not utilizing, but the last one said, hey, only show this if the period is less than equal to the base report date. Okay, good. There's maybe 2 flavors of the balance sheet. I'll talk about a third flavor later, like companies side by side, and I'll do so even maybe through an income statement variety that I think is going to be a little more effective. Now, let me return to the thought and do a little sidestep, try to make this and a lot of tips and tricks for you. I spoke of the client viewer having advantages for administration and security, so let me take a few extra moments to acquaint you with it further. Within the client viewer, I'm looking here in the lower left at the report date of this balance sheet. However, I'm going to click this button in the lower left called the report library. This has a look and feel to File Explorer, like different folders out in your network, but really these are the different folders you're doing within what's called the Manager Reporter library, where you store all these financial reports in one SQL database stored on your servers behind the scenes. You can easily come up here, right mouse click, create new folders. And then regarding security, there's really 2 terms we frequently use. One is called folder security. So I'm in currently the library. I'm right mouse clicking for what's called the report library permissions. I'm really just defining who can see the reports that I'm going to put within this folder. And these folders might vary. They could be date driven, like you see some of these years and maybe months within, or these folders, anything possible, might be group driven, like here's my board of director reports, here's my CFO reports, etc. And as I finish up, and I'll even backtrack one little click for occasionally a little repeat of a key concept or 2, I'm in a given folder. How about the CFO I'll continue secondly with? I'm going to retrace my step, which is right-click for the library permissions. Who can or cannot see reports in this folder? There's no users listed in this window, but I'm going to click on the Add button. And how about I might even create a group within Manager Reporter of all the accounting people. And yes, maybe I trust them, yes, to view reports that I put into this folder. And usually my power users in the accounting department, yes, I'm going to turn on these extra options to be able to edit, create, and delete reports and folders over time. And I can click on the Add button, and I might have another individual user like Rob or Nick, where we have a single head for a single user. Or how about here, I have maybe another group like MSX group. Similar type of story, but maybe people outside of your accounting department, they might only view reports, not do any other administration like edit, create, delete. We call that, again, folder security. Very nice and efficient. Let me now finish the second sort of security mechanism that we commonly use is what we call tree security. And how about in this illustration, and more commonly for an income statement that you might want to break it down by different locations or departments. Let me open up now an income statement report utilizing a reporting tree. Shortcut I'll use is to the left of the generate button. It will pull up my last ran report to save a little time. Inside the client viewer, I'm seeing this report in. And let me now further clarify where you define which viewer you prefer. So I'm going to come back here on my taskbar to the report designer, where you have your rows, columns, and trees and reports, and you run them. And where I define which viewer I prefer is found under Tools, Options. And there's just one check mark here I already have turned on, which is to use the Manager Reporter viewer. Whenever you install Manager Reporter out of the box, this is normally turned off. If it's turned off, that means you're going to see your reports in the web viewer. Perfectly fine, but especially for you power users usually attending these sessions, I usually recommend and like to use the client viewer for some of that earlier administration. Then secondly, it also has better viewing and better export abilities as well, that I'll maybe bullet point those and perhaps allude further to in a subsequent report. Now, in this particular reporting tree report, I get the best of both worlds, meaning when I go back to this income statement, you'll see here to the left, I'm viewing this report now. I see all the different tree units. However, if I were to open up this report within the web viewer, I'll at least show you and compare and contrast these two, that in the web viewer, and here's where I'm going to tease myself being a lazy person on my keyboard. I like less clicks, the better, because here in the web viewer, if you're using a tree, you have to do one extra click to see the different units of the tree. This particular report, these are just the different departments that I have. And now sometimes you have a very large tree, like 10 different locations and 5 departments within each. You might have a 50 or 100 unit larger tree. In the web viewer, I'd have to do one click to at least see the tree, and then I have to scroll up and down a little bit more so in the client viewer. And I always call myself the biggest fan and biggest critic of these products, but I want to again just show you efficiencies. And I just return back to the client viewer. The tree is already expanded. And if I had a large tree, I'd be able to see them up and down. And sometimes you might have different levels in your tree. Only have one level, meaning the individual departments here that roll up to the top summary. But you could have multi-layered tree. And here, as I drill into the report, let me show you some other cool abilities. I'm going to assume most are relevant, but maybe for some new users, maybe not. I'm looking at the top summary unit of the tree that rolls up all my different departments. Now, when we drill into the report, we have some nice ways further to analyze the data quickly. Like when I drill into my sales row, when I'm using a tree, it is now showing me the different departments that have data. Only my sales department has sales data, but I'm going to click on the back button because there might be some additional line like this expense line when I drill in. These departments have data for that node of the tree. Okay, so a lot of times I start high level, drill down to see maybe where I have some variances. And if I wanted to look just at an accounting department, by all means, I can hop here in my tree. I'm opening up and seeing my profit and loss report just for maybe that unit of the tree. And as I continue going down further, like how about I'll pick on this utility expense or even sales data of some sort. We have additional levels, what we call the account level. Like here is in the middle, account 6190 is the utility. Sometimes it might be more than one line for multiple accounts or departments that I'm drilling into. And then after this account level, we even have one additional layer, what is called the transaction level. Because here to the right, I can see maybe the vendor or customer, like Intercity Electric, that I then maybe a payment to, and oops, that's right, I remember that invoice. So at your fingertips, including your managers, you're going to have all of this account and transaction level detail. And I'll do one final example to that. I'm returning to my top summary unit, drill into sales, then the account level, which we're now on, followed by maybe transaction level. So here is maybe customer ABC that I'm receiving this data for. Now, the key concept in this last illustration is simply two things. One is in your report. Inside Designer, the first thing of two is in your report definition. You have the ability to run your report for those three levels, like financial, account, and third, transaction. And then the second key concept I just demonstrated was, as we look to our column, we can add to our column definition what are called attribute column types. And my interpretation of that is, hey, this is just additional general ledger detail information I can then display. And whenever you choose an attribute column type, this pick list and about everything I share with you today, like 95% of Managed Reporter, it does not matter what general ledger system or version you're on, it's agnostic. I could be on Exapta, Navision, Solomon, Great Plains, etc. GP, does not matter, but this might be one rare field that does slightly differ based on what general ledger system you are using. And these are really just my transaction little fields, but great for even you and your managers to see that financial data as. Now, whenever I look at a financial report, as I'm going to transition to the next thought, there's going to be some things that I like about the report and do not like regarding who the recipient is and what my end goal. So what I'm going to briefly show you is in this departmental report, I'm starting with the first example of three, where I'm now showing my different departments in tree units, which is great, meaning in my lines or row format, I might have a lot of individual revenue and expenses. Or secondly, what I like about the column is I might have actual budget this year, last year variances. And third, what I like is I can then look at just sales, and then you might be the sales manager. And when you open up this report, what we call tree security, then you might only be able to see the sales unit. Or similar story, you might be the administration manager. When you open up this report, if we use what is called tree security, you might only be able to see the administration unit of this report. Now let me back to Designer and let me acquaint you with the reporting tree that we utilized for this report. Okay, so here is my original report. Like here's where I have the row or column being used. I'm now going to open up the tree. Within our reporting tree, we just saw we can take one report, great, break it down in different companies, location, divisions, as you need to. Here's my graphical view to the left, what we call our worksheet view to the right. I'm only looking at one company data, but here is one of the key fields is we're looking at within our general ledger, and this is our demonstration database that we're on. We have really three segments within our general ledger, at least Microsoft's demonstration database. We generically named our segments segment 1, 2, and 3, but really segment 1 is our department. That usually has a correct name like that, or segment 2 is our account segment, and segment 3 is our project. And I built the tree on this segment 1. Part of me is tempted to create some new trees, but maybe that will save that for a future session. All right, after we looked at some of the balance sheet, let's even take a moment to look at the row definition for these reports. So I'm going to come up here and just close a couple of windows so I don't have too much open. And as we looked at the tree just then, there is one last thought, I meant to share on that report, is what we call tree security. As I open up the tree one more time, I was emphasizing the company, where it might be even a tree that has multi-company in it, as I'm showing you this little pick list, and that's all you really need to do multi-company reporting. You have to use a tree, and this field is where you might grab company A, B, or C. Secondly, I built this tree on our segment 1, which is our department. And how about the last little note to make, especially what we call tree security, is this field right here. I'll do 2 quick examples. How about everybody on this session listening? How about we call you the power users in our finance and accounting area, and you have access to all the data, all company, all locations. So I'm on this top summary unit. I double-click unit security, this button called users and groups. And then how about this is the accounting group we created inside Manage Reporter. And my intent is also, an emphasis, is to turn on this check mark, because I want all of us in accounting that have not only the summary unit, but access to all the child units beneath, meaning all the different companies, departments beneath. Once I click OK, then whenever anybody from accounting opens up this report, they'll be able to see all those units. But how about going back to maybe this service department? How about Jane is the manager of that? So I'm going to come inside here, double click, users and groups. And then how about let's just choose this user as the manager for that unit of the tree. Once I click OK, that is what we call tree security. That way I might send all of you, my managers now, you 50 managers or whomever on the phone call, when you open up this report, you might only be able to see that unit through tree security. Let me now transition from the balance sheet to the cash flow. And I know 40 minutes goes very, very fast, so I'll be sure to conclude with my email and also some nice training and user guides I'll be sure to pass along if you don't have access to those. Now, a few little notes on my statement of cash flow report is I always start with my balance sheet, which for accounting 101, like debit credit little tutorial, is balance sheet grabs ending amounts, year-to-date ending, versus a cash flow. If I were just talking about monthly cash flow, it's just going to grab the monthly periodic change. So let me show you inside the completed report first. This statement of cash flow report, I'm doing both for the month and secondly, year to date. Now here in yellow, like column B like boy or column E like Edward, those are my only displaying columns. C and D, they're no printing, because here column B like boy, this is my monthly change in cash, and unlike my balance sheet, which grabs a year-to-date ending amount, column B instead is what we call a monthly periodic column. So that's one key difference, and I'll open up the column definition in just a second to show you this. Now, secondly, to handle your year-to-date change in cash, we normally utilize 3 columns for that: a year-to-date beginning, secondly, a year-to-date end, and third, this column E, which is just a calculation that takes my year-to-date ending minus my beginning. Like for cash, or excuse me, net income, I meant to say, it starts the year at 0. So if I take this ending amount, 300,000 minus 0, that's the result here. I'm going to re-quote that again, especially once we get to some of the more fun, involved rows. And now I'm going to go back to the column definition, give you a nice visual of what I quoted. This column B for my monthly change in cash is not a year-to-date like our balance sheet. It simply is a periodic column. Notice some also filters we could utilize, like beginning balance or year-to-date. And remember these type of filters, because when I go to the row definition, we're going to utilize a similar filter on my row for beginning cash like you're seeing here. Now, looking at these 3 columns here to the right, this is the only printing column here in yellow that's highlighted. It's just going to take D minus C, my year-to-date ending, minus my year-to-date beginning. Now let me acquaint you with something what we call calculation priority. In summary, we have our two building blocks like the row format, or secondly, our column definition. A little quick review, at least through Excel notes, is in my row definition, you have two types of formulas you could use, what is called a total, used when I'm adding and subtracting, or secondly, we have a cal format code if we're doing any multiplication, division, or if then. Followed by in the column calculation, we only have one type of column called a calc column that handles all formula types like adding, subtracting, dividing. So looking back at designer, this calculated column, we only have one choice. Good, super easy. Now, since these are two independent building blocks, like a row that's independent from the column, I have a different formula in each. So there's a key concept that I'm leading up to, what is called calculation priority. That is basically where you have a calculated row that intersects with a calculated column. And let me take a quick second to show you this note inside Excel. Because how about I have a couple of rows, like a row here for revenue. And how about here in this cell, I have a value of $100. Or how about here in my other column, let's call it company B, I might have $200. Right beneath this first row I'm talking about, like revenue, let's say we have a profit dollar of $10 and $20 for those two respective items. And what Manager Reporter does is finally third, I get to this last row, we have Manager Reporter does your row formula first, where it's going to take this $10 of profit for company A divided by my $100 of revenue for company A, and it does your row formulas first, usually by default in any new report you create. Then secondly, after it does the row formula that I'm indicating here in the yellow color, what Manager Reporter secondly does is your column calculation. So it will sum up the $100 and $200 of revenue between those two companies to sum up to be $300. It will sum up these two profits of $10 and $20 to be 30. And yes, it's also going to sum up my two 10% values to equal 20%, which here my $30 profit combined over the 300, that's obviously wrong. That's wrong when we do the default on any new report, which is to do your row calculation first and your column calculation second. So this is correct, my Excel example. And also once I return back to the cash flow, we have to change our calculation priority to do the column formula first and then the row formula last. What I just quoted is also very detailed out here in our training and user guides. We actually helped author that during the 12 plus years we worked at Microsoft. And let me also share one little thing here. That is, if you do not have this training and user guide, we have approximately 20 chapters, very in detailed length. And today's session, I'm really hitting upon some of these primary chapters on balance sheet, cash flow, and even formulas talked about within this income statement chapter. So if you do not have those, I'll be sure to stick around to ask and field some questions. So take an opportunity again of the chat window. I'll be answering those toward the tail end of the session. Now let me return back to the cash flow report, as that was sort of a public address announcement to give you some nice little hands-on information as a follow-up to this. Back to our completed cash flow report, really what I'm leading up to is we have to have one quote-unquote advanced formula within our statement of cash flow report. Notice this row here in yellow where I bring in my beginning cash. Well, notice here we have actually a filter that we use in our row definition to bring in the beginning balance. So in my monthly column, which is this column B that I'm pointing to, yes, that's $754,000. That's my beginning cash for the month. Now in these two year-to-date columns, which respectively are beginning, or here to the right, year-to-date ending, we will see that when I use a filter in my row for beginning cash, what it's going to do is in both these year-to-date columns, it's going to bring in the beginning cash for the year, which is $398,000 in each of these two cells. However, my end result, which is my calculated column here to the right, that is basically taking this 398 value minus 398, like I quoted before, of income, which this row was fine before, and every other row is perfectly fine. The only thing is I run into one little exception here that I'm pointing to, where this zero value is not my beginning cash for the year. It's either this cell that I'm pointing to, which is really column D like David, for the row 1190. And I always call Manager Reporter a glorified spreadsheet, where I have column letters that intersect with row code numbers when you spit out your report data. So that is what I'm going to call cell D1190, or this cell to the left. That is column C up above for the row 1190. And let me now take you to this formula, because this row here in yellow is wrong, especially in this one cell. And then what we do is we correct it by adding a second calculated row, which I'm now going to go to. Now, two things. One is, before I forget, in the report definition, we have this settings tab. One of the key concepts is this button here, what is called calculation priority. We've already changed it. However, the earlier quote, for a new report, this is the default, to do your row formula first and your column second. So in your cash flow report, we definitely need to change that around. Secondly, I'm then going to open up this row definition called cash flow using this icon here to the right or up above in my toolbar. Now, as I go from top down, here's my income, and then to the right, I'm grabbing all my revenue expenses, which is the range of main accounts, or segment 2 for this demo company, accounts 4,000 through 8,999. Now, another key concept on the balance sheet is we usually would want to change or reverse the sign on all of my accounts except for maybe a depreciation add back, where I do not have the flipping of the sign on this depreciation add back at the top. But almost every other row, like receivables, payables, yes, normally we want to change the account. Now, additionally, I know I'm probably going to be running out of time here soon. Here's that one key row in concept. First of all, here to the right, these are my cash accounts that begin with a 1-1, where I'm wildcarding it. In this field, what is called the row modifier, we're utilizing what's called an account modifier. And these are similar to what we saw in the column. Like, do I want to bring in beginning balance? Yes. Or also I could grab in year-to-date ending balance, or maybe I want to grab in the current balance if I had all year-to-date columns. And usually what occurs is these row modifiers we're showing you override what you have in the column. So that's why we saw the beginning balance brought into both those year-to-date columns. We eventually would make this row non-print through use of this one print control field. And then right beneath it is where I correct it using what we call an advanced row calculation. And my two printing columns were columns B and E. Now, column B equals basically the same column B, which is my month-to-date column, for the row above it, 1190. And then the syntax you see here for my second formula, or my second printing column, is column E equals, and then whatever column dot line or row code intersection. So here's that row code here, 1190. And as I go back to the report, this cell right here that I'm pointing to, this is really column B for this calculated row, equals the cell above it, which is column B for the row code 1190. Or my second printing column, this cell where you see 398,000, column E for this row equals either this cell, D1190, or this cell, C1190. And what you see here in my little tutorial that I'd probably recommend on some of your advanced reports is maybe in the column doing two things. One is to help me lay out where my report data intersects with one another. Often put column letters like you see up above here. And then secondly, how we saw those row code numbers to the right of each row is I'm using this column type called row to show the row code number. All right, now as I return back here, there's the row code numbers. Okay, I'm sure I'm probably winding down and running out of time here shortly. So what I'm at least going to do is pull up some of my contact information. I'll be definitely sticking around. So hopefully you took advantage of entering your questions in the chat queue. I'll be sure to field as many of those I can along the way. I have a nice little abbreviated slide deck here. However, let me even maybe comment on a couple things. One would be, I take it to heart. We've been doing this myself for 20 plus years. That if you have any questions, fire away, as I'll be fielding those as many as I can. Otherwise, please feel free to jot down my email. I'll be glad to field any questions. Sometimes I might politely say, oh, this might get a little more involved. Send me a screen capture of what you're addressing. And then additionally, for a nice little Dynamics Con little benefit, since we've been involved with these user groups for so many years, there might be instances where, hey, I might need to take a quick peek at look at three-dimensionally of the row column and how they intersect with the tree you're using. So that might be some nice little takeaways there in the upper left-hand corner to also help you in any way, shape, or form, including the training and user guides. They used to be found out on Microsoft Customer Partner Source, but Microsoft yanked away a lot of those links. So here was that large training guide chapter, about 20 chapters, maybe about 20 pages each of good step-by-step screen captures. So if you don't have that, I'll be sure to pass along the web link for that. Okay, as we now wind down this session, hope to see you in a future session by Dynamics Community on this virtual event that they have, and definitely maybe in person at some of the future trade shows that I've been involved with so many years. So thank you one and all, and do stick around and field those questions. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day and session at Dynamics Con.
All right, welcome everybody. This is Derek. I'm here now to field any questions that you have, and there were a few that came through the queue in the chat area, and I wanted just to share a couple of those verbally and also call your attention to that, and I'll go back to that chat area and field any others that come up in the next few minutes. So I have about maybe 4 items just to share that came to the queue. One was, hey Derek, what are some tips of maybe some underutilized features with inside Manage Reporter? So my first thought would be, hey, maybe at month end, I have 5 reports I send to management within a board package. Instead of me running those 5 reports individually, I usually like to create a report group that I can then run multiple reports all with just one click. And secondly, related to that, when I do output reports, I still see this day and age so many people doing it still the old manual way, which is printed copies, Excel, PDF. So usually I say, don't do that. Instead, take advantage of your electronic viewer. Within Manage Reporter, you get unlimited viewer licenses. So definitely take advantage of those. And then I'd send those people my report link electronically. That gives them the advantage of drill down, including the account and transaction detail level. We saw briefly that in our illustration. Secondly, they can also export those to Excel or print them on their own. And then additionally, there's nice annotations you also can add to your financial report. So any line of your report, let's say I wanted to explain a variance like actual to budget, inside your viewer, you can right mouse click and make a comment or add a note to any of your financial footnotes, which is also a very nice feature. The next question or little tip further to share, there's a question regarding companies that might be on different fiscal years. And then my response or profitability is inside the column definition within Manage Reporter. You have 2 fields at the bottom, one called the start date, the other called the end date. So maybe I want it to be January for both my companies, which January might be period 1 for one company, but in a different fiscal year, it might be a different period. So that start and end date fields in the column will accomplish that. Third item that came through the queue was talking about multi-currency. And probably my first response would be, sometimes currency gets maybe a little bit more involved, but thankfully it's relatively intuitive. And most of the heavy lifting is done inside your general ledger. So all of your conversion is done in the GL. However, if you're not doing so, of course, I would recommend to have your general ledger do it. But if not, you can also have Manage Reporter linked to Excel or even some of your column And line formulas, I might do some conversion rate formulas if you're not doing so. And this might even be another example of companies that might not be even on your general ledger. And I sort of call that offline manual consolidations that you can link to Excel and report off of. And another question, or at least thought, there's maybe 2 or 3 related, is, well, Derek, I know there might be a few different ways to maybe do some reporting. There might be like SQL reporting services, Power BI. However, the advantage of the Manager Reporter application is it's accountant friendly. It was created by accountants for accountants. And then we have the reusable rows, columns, and trees. And we have very canned out of the box little pick list filters for our departments, accounts, time periods. So very user friendly, as I'm just comparing how Manager Reporter sort of differentiates itself in being very user friendly behind those. All right, let me look back to the queue in case anything else came over. I'm going through a couple of screens. Another one was related to security, and I would just recap maybe 3 thoughts on that. The first being, definitely take advantage of the viewers you have, because you have free unlimited viewers you can utilize for distributing your reports securely electronically. Then followed by, in the session today, I talked about 2 key concepts. One being folder security within your report library. That's seen within the client viewer, not the web viewer. And then secondly, related to security after what we call folder security I just described is good old tree security. So we open up the tree, that field to the right for who can open up and view that given unit. All right, looking back to a couple other cues. I did put my email in one of the responses about a question came like, hey, how can I access this training and user guide? So my email address, as you see my name in the lower left, hopefully, derek.krebs@msxgroup.com. And I'll just paste that into the chat area one more time for those needing that. And by all means, that 40 minutes or so went by very, very fast. So I have a plethora of additional information to share. So we routinely do these webinars. So look for upcoming dates and times. And I look forward to seeing everybody hopefully in some live events in the future. But it's nice to have in the comforts of our own home, as you can sort of see there in the background. I wish I had a nice little cozy office, but hopefully this will do. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today, but I'll still stick on the line for the next 5 to 10 minutes in case any questions do come through. But a nice little thank you for Dynamics Con event here. Okay, another thought or question that came in through here is a term, what is called dimension value sets. Now, what dimension value sets are is where I can centrally name any of one of my segments. I'll give you 2 examples. First of all, in my segment or dimension for the account segment, maybe I create a dimension set called cash, or another one called receivables, or third maybe called cost of goods sold. I can then centrally name and define that item, and then I can use it in 100 different rows, columns, or trees. Now, if I change my mind, like how about my crazing controller adds a new cost of goods sold account, then I do not have to go back to all the rows, columns, trees. Do not. I simply go to the dimension value set I created, and inside Manager Reporter, these dimension value sets are found within any row, column, or tree. And if you go under Edit, Manage Dimension Value Sets. Just to repeat that again, within any row, column, or tree, you can go under Edit, Manage Dimension Value Sets. You're going to get a filter for what segment. My first example is like on the account segment, like one called cash, receivables, or cost of goods sold. My second example might be if I have a department segment, maybe I want to create a dimension value setter named group called my administrative departments, or maybe a second group called my operations departments. So that way, again, if you change your mind, because people have ever growing or changing chart of accounts or location departments, that is going to be a very useful field, those dimension value sets. So thank you for that little plug-in question. Another is one of the oldest tips and tricks in a book is adding check rows to all of our reports. So this example would be on an income statement that you have a very detailed one, like a lot of individual revenue expense accounts. You would have maybe a total at the very bottom where you sum up or calculate net income. And you want to make sure your figures are correct, that net income truly is our net income. Then what we could do is add one easy check row at the bottom that usually I make no printing. In the row, there's a print control field called NP for a no printing field. For this net income one check row, if I wanted to grab all revenue expense accounts, it might be some account range like 4,000 to 9,999, meaning 4,000 maybe starts my revenue accounts all the way through 999. That all grabs all revenue expense. And I do that one check row on one single row that I make no printing. And then I just have a row beneath it that just says, hey, whatever I'm out of balance from my total where I'm formulating income versus that check row, I do the difference between those two. Hopefully I'm not out of balance. Hopefully those two are in sync. But if there's any month where you see you're out of balance, where maybe that out of balance row does show, then there is very good capability inside Manager Reporter to find what I call the needle in the haystack. That is, if I wanted to find any of those missing or duplicate accounts. Within the row, I'm going to talk about two things. Within the row, if you go under Tools, Missing Account Analysis, that's an easy way then the system will comb through all of your different row definitions. Maybe you're focusing on your income statement detail one, and then in that Tools, Missing Account Analysis done in the row, you're going to see really two parts of that window. One window would show you all the different rows. I'll highlight, let's say, my income statement or balance sheet row, and then down beneath in this Tools, Missing Account Analysis area, you'll see the accounts that you're missing in that row definition, which is very good to find for you any accounts that you've missed. Now, secondly, to find duplicate accounts, you have to open up your report definition. And on the report definition, on the options tab, I believe it is, for the output and distribution, there is a check mark for reporting duplicate accounts. You just turn on that check mark for report duplicate accounts. Then when you run your report to the client viewer, not web viewer, but when you run your report to the client viewer, you'll be able to go under View Duplicate Accounts to then see those. So oldest tip and trick of the book, check rows, an easy way to find missing and duplicates. I was earlier talking about dimension value sets. I favor those because I think they're so much more nimble and easier to utilize. But then also a question came in talking about, what about account categories? Which what I just described, dimension value sets, I think it's, again, faster, easier, and that's done inside our reporting tool, meaning Manager Reporter. But yes, you can in your general ledger. You can go and define different account categories, but I think that's a little bit more tedious and not as user-friendly. And also these account categories in your general ledger, they're only for your account segment, versus the advantage of dimension value sets we do inside Manager Reporter is across multiple different segments, like my second example, like department groups of, let's say, admin departments or operations. So thank you for that question that I'll probably just verbally do without doing a long-winded reply or typing of that. All right, question came in about distinguishing between duplicate accounts and check lines. Maybe just email me, because I have, whenever we do our training classes, there are a few little steps, because if I ever find I'm out of balance, what I do first of all is I immediately delete those check accounts, meaning that one row where I grabbed all revenue expenses, like accounts 4,000 through 999. The first thing I do is, when I'm finding I'm out of balance, is I delete those accounts, because if I left those still in there, I would not have missed any accounts, and I would duplicated about every account above, also in my check row. So delete that, then is when you can run your more efficient account analysis. Okay, thank you for those questions. And I'm just going back to a few of the questions up above here, excuse me. I'm going through to make sure I didn't miss any. And I'll probably just do a couple other concluding thank you and repetitive thanks. So definitely thanks our event sponsors here for having this be available. And we hopefully look for you at a future session. And by all means, Derek.Krebs at msxgroup.com if you have any follow-up questions. If I had accidentally overlooked any, let me know, or if I can help with any of the training user guides, I can provide you those little download links. Otherwise, have a good rest of your day and rest of the event.